What's really going on with Caitlin Clark and the WNBA? Today, we're diving deep into the most controversial topic in women's basketball, and I've researched every angle. What I found will shock you because this isn't about jealousy or skill, it's much deeper than that. The real story behind why WNBA players seem to have issues with Caitlin Clark involves racism, media bias, toxic fan bases, and systemic problems that go way beyond basketball. Let me start with the biggest bombshell. The All-Star voting results from 2025 that revealed everything. Caitlin Clark dominated fan voting, securing the #1 position. The media ranked her third among guards, but here's where it gets interesting. Her fellow WNBA players ranked her 9th among guards. Not third, not fifth, but 9th. Even more telling, players ranked her as only the second best guard on her own Indiana Fever team, behind Kelsey Mitchell. This wasn't about evaluating basketball skills. This was players sending a very clear message about how they really feel about Clark. But why would players feel this way about someone who's undeniably talented? The answer lies in what I call the toxic fan base problem, and it's the biggest issue of all. Clark's supporters have subjected WNBA players to relentless racist harassment on social media. We're talking about Black players receiving racial slurs, degrading comments, and abuse so severe that many have had to limit their social media presence or leave platforms entirely. When fans weaponize Clark's success to attack other players with racist language, it creates resentment toward the entire situation, even though Clark herself isn't personally responsible for these actions. This brings us to Clark's strategic silence, which has become a major point of contention. Whenever Clark is asked about racism or her fans' behavior, she consistently responds with variations of, "I just want to focus on basketball." While she's not personally racist, players feel frustrated that she won't actively condemn the harassment being done in her name. Other white players like Paige Buckers have spoken out against racism in the sport, making Clark's silence more noticeable and frustrating to her peers. Players interpret this silence as either indifference or worse, tacit approval of the toxic behavior. The media coverage inequality adds another layer to this controversy. Research shows that white WNBA players typically receive 2 to 5 times more media coverage than Black players, but with Clark, we're potentially looking at 100 times more coverage. When players like Angel Reese get physically roughed up by opponents like Alyssa Thomas, who was actually ejected from games for aggressive play, it barely registers in national media. But any physical contact with Clark becomes a massive story with national coverage, think pieces, and debates about player safety. This disparity in coverage sends a clear message about whose experiences matter more in the media landscape. Speaking of physical play, let's address the targeting narrative that exploded after incidents like Chennedy Carter's hip check, where Carter was caught on camera saying inappropriate things before the contact. However, veteran players like Diana Taurasi have emphasized that the WNBA has always been a physical league. Rookies historically face rough treatment as a form of initiation and respect-earning process. The difference now is the reaction when it happens to Clark versus when it happens to other rookies. Every hard foul on Clark gets analyzed frame by frame, while similar or worse treatment of other players goes largely unnoticed. The disrespectful fan expectations created tension even before Clark played her first professional game. UConn coach Gino Auriemma called out Clark's fan base as delusional, disrespectful, and unknowledgeable for claiming she'd immediately dominate the WNBA. Betting odds had her as the 3rd or 4th MVP candidate as a rookie, which veteran players found insulting. These expectations suggested that a college player, regardless of talent, would immediately outperform women who'd been grinding in the professional league for years. This created immediate resentment before Clark even stepped on a WNBA court. Clark's controversial associations have also created problems. Her connection to figures like Dave Portnoy, who has made racist comments in the past, upsets other players even more. When Clark fails to distance herself from such associations while maintaining her just focus on basketball stance, it sends mixed messages about her values and priorities. Players see these associations as enabling the very behavior that's harming the league's culture. The league's failure to protect all players equally represents another major issue. While there's been criticism about the league not protecting Clark enough, players point out the double standard. The same level of protection, media attention, and concern isn't offered to other players facing harassment or physical play. Commissioner Kathy Engelbert has stated that physicality affects every player, not just Clark, but the response from fans, media, and sometimes the league itself suggests otherwise. Here's where it gets really complex. Clark has brought unprecedented attention to the WNBA. We're talking about a 601% increase in merchandise sales, 170% boost in viewership, and sold-out arenas that hadn't seen capacity crowds in years. This success should be celebrated, but it came with unintended consequences that have divided the league. Many players appreciate the increased visibility and financial benefits, but they resent the way it's happening, through a narrative that often diminishes other players' contributions and experiences. The racial dynamics cannot be ignored in this conversation. The WNBA is a predominantly black league, and when a white player receives disproportionate attention and protection, it triggers historical and ongoing concerns about racial equity in sports. Players have seen this pattern before in other sports where white athletes in predominantly black leagues receive outsized attention and different treatment. The frustration isn't necessarily with Clark personally, but with the systemic patterns her situation represents. Social media amplifies every aspect of this controversy. Clark's supporters often dismiss any criticism of her or her treatment as jealousy or hate, while players' supporters see this as minimizing legitimate concerns about racism and inequality. This creates an endless cycle where genuine issues get buried under accusations and counter-accusations, making productive dialogue nearly impossible. The financial implications add another dimension. Clark's popularity has generated significant revenue for the league, but players question whether they're all benefiting equally from this boom. When one player's presence drives all the economic growth, but the systemic issues affecting other players remain unaddressed, it creates tension about priorities and values. Veterans in the league have tried to contextualize this situation by explaining WNBA culture and history. They've pointed out that every great player, regardless of race, faced challenges when entering the league. However, they also acknowledge that the scale and nature of the attention around Clark is unprecedented, creating new challenges that the league hasn't had to navigate before. The international perspective adds yet another layer. WNBA players compete overseas during the off-season, where they often receive more respect and better treatment than in their home league. When they see the disparity in how Clark is treated versus their own experiences, both domestically and internationally, it reinforces feelings of inequity and frustration. Looking at this situation objectively, multiple things can be true simultaneously. Caitlin Clark is incredibly talented and deserves respect and protection as a professional athlete. The racist harassment from some of her supporters is completely unacceptable and creates a hostile environment for other players. The media coverage disparity reflects broader systemic issues in sports journalism and society. The league's handling of the situation has been imperfect, but is evolving as they navigate unprecedented circumstances. The solution isn't choosing sides or dismissing legitimate concerns from any party. It requires acknowledging that Clark's success and the problems it has highlighted can coexist. The WNBA needs to address fan behavior more aggressively, implement consistent protection standards for all players, and work toward more equitable media coverage and treatment. Until the league, media, and fans address these underlying issues, the racist harassment, media coverage inequality, protection double standards, and systemic problems, this tension will continue. The WNBA's biggest success story has become its biggest controversy, and that's the real tragedy here. Instead of celebrating unprecedented growth and talent, we're dealing with division and resentment that could have been prevented with better leadership and awareness. The path forward requires honest conversations about race, equity, and respect in professional sports. It requires fans to hold themselves accountable for their behavior and language. It requires media to examine their coverage patterns and biases, and it requires the league to implement consistent standards that protect and promote all players equally. This controversy reveals that success in sports isn't just about individual talent. It's about how that success fits into larger social, cultural, and systemic contexts. Until we address these broader issues, even the most talented players will find themselves caught in controversies that overshadow their athletic achievements. That's the real lesson from the Caitlin Clark situation, and it's one that extends far beyond basketball.